Waiter humiliates poor old woman begging for food. Unaware. Barron Trump is watching. It was a chilly afternoon in the heart of New York City. A bustling cafe with its warm yellow lights and the hum of conversations offered refuge from the cold streets outside. Among the crowd was Ryan, a waiter who had grown impatient and cynical over the years. To him, every customer was just another task, another ticket to punch. As the line at the counter moved briskly, the door creaked open. An elderly woman stepped in, her frail frame wrapped in an old coat that hung loosely on her shoulders. She clutched a worn cloth bag, her steps hesitant, as if she was unsure she belonged. The chatter of the cafe dimmed slightly as her presence was noticed, and then ignored. She approached the counter, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Excuse me, I haven't eaten in days. Could you spare something small? A piece of bread, maybe?" Ryan looked up from the screen he was tapping, his face immediately twisting in irritation. "This is a business, lady, not a soup kitchen," he said sharply, loud enough for the nearby customers to hear. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, but she tried again, her hands trembling as she held out a few coins. "Please, I don't want much, just enough to stop the hunger." Ryan scoffed and crossed his arms. "You don't have enough for anything here. Stop wasting my time and leave before you make a scene." The cafe grew uncomfortably quiet. Some customers exchanged uneasy glances, but no one spoke up. The woman stood frozen, her eyes welling with tears. She whispered, "I'm sorry," and turned to leave. Her shoulders slumped under the weight of shame. But before she could reach the door, a voice rang out. "Wait!" The crowd turned their heads toward the corner table, where a boy, no older than 17, was standing. He wore a simple hoodie and jeans, blending into the crowd, but there was something commanding about his presence. Ryan frowned. "What now?" The boy stepped forward, his gaze steady. "That wasn't necessary," he said calmly, but there was an unmistakable firmness in his tone. Ryan sneered. "Who are you to tell me how to do my job?" "Someone who knows the difference between doing your job and humiliating someone," the boy replied. He turned to the elderly woman and smiled gently. "Ma'am, please come back. You don't have to leave." The woman hesitated, looking between the boy and Ryan, unsure of what to do. But there was a kindness in the boy's eyes that gave her courage. She took a tentative step forward. Ryan rolled his eyes. "Listen, kid, if you want to play hero, go ahead, but don't expect me to cover it." The boy reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. He placed it on the counter without breaking eye contact with Ryan. "This should cover whatever she wants, and I mean anything." The room fell silent. Customers whispered among themselves, watching the scene unfold with a mix of curiosity and admiration. Ryan hesitated, his bravado faltering under the weight of the boy's unwavering gaze. Finally, he snatched the bill and grumbled, "Fine. What'll it be, lady?" The elderly woman, still stunned, managed to stammer, Just a sandwich and some tea, please." Ryan muttered something under his breath and punched the order into the system. The boy turned back to the woman, his smile never fading. "Why don't you sit down? You shouldn't have to eat alone." She nodded, her eyes glistening with gratitude. As they sat together at a table near the window, the boy asked gently, "What's your name?" "Margaret," she replied softly. "I don't know how to thank you. I don't even know your name." The boy smiled but didn't answer right away. Instead, he said, "It's no trouble at all, Margaret. Everyone deserves kindness." Margaret hesitated before speaking again. "You're so young. What made you do this? Most people just look the other way." The boy's expression grew thoughtful, but before he could respond, Ryan appeared with Margaret's order. He placed the tray on the table without a word, though his usual scowl was replaced with a strange, conflicted look. As Margaret began eating, her hands trembling slightly, the boy leaned back in his chair, observing the cafe. The atmosphere had shifted. Customers who had once been indifferent now seemed introspective, their conversations quieter, their glances lingering on the pair by the window. But then something unexpected happened. A man in a dark suit entered the cafe, his sharp gaze scanning the room before locking onto the boy. He approached the table and leaned down to whisper something in the boy's ear. Margaret looked puzzled, but the boy simply nodded, his demeanor calm. "I'll be right out," he said. The man hesitated as if unsure whether to leave, but the boy gave him a reassuring smile. Finally, the man stepped outside, leaving the boy and Margaret alone again. Margaret tilted her head, curiosity evident in her expression. "Who was that?" she asked. The boy chuckled softly. "Just someone making sure I don't stay out too long." Before Margaret could ask more, a commotion erupted at the counter. Ryan was arguing with another customer, his voice rising again. The boy's smile faded as he watched the scene unfold. Margaret followed his gaze. "You've done enough, dear. You don't have to get involved again." The boy shook his head. "Sometimes doing the right thing means stepping in, even when it's uncomfortable." As he stood up, the cafe door swung open once more, and the man in the suit re-entered, this time accompanied by another figure. The room fell into stunned silence as people recognized who it was. Margaret gasped, her fork clattering onto her plate. "It can't be." The boy smiled knowingly, but he said nothing. The cafe had fallen into an almost eerie silence. Every pair of eyes was now fixed on the tall, well-dressed man who had just entered. His presence was commanding, not only because of his towering height, but because he was instantly recognizable. It was Barron Trump. The realization spread across the cafe like wildfire. Whispers broke out among the customers, and some even pulled out their phones, their curiosity overpowering their manners. Barron, however, seemed unfazed. He walked with a calm confidence toward the boy and Margaret, his sharp eyes taking in the scene before him. Ryan, who had been mid-argument with another customer, froze in place. His face turned pale as he realized who had just entered. For a moment, he stood awkwardly behind the counter, unsure of whether to speak or hide. Barron reached the table and placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I think it's time we go," he said, his tone quiet but firm. Margaret's eyes darted between Barron and the boy, her mind racing to make sense of what was happening. "Wait, what's going on? Who is he?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The boy turned back to her with a warm smile. "I'm sorry for not introducing myself earlier," he said. "My name is Barron too. Barron Trump." Margaret's jaw dropped, her spoon slipping from her hand. She stared at him, her voice failing her for a moment. You're the president's son?" Barron nodded, his expression modest. "Yes, but I didn't want that to matter. I just wanted to help." The room erupted into quiet murmurs as the realization hit everyone else. The boy who had stood up for the elderly woman wasn't just anyone. He was someone with power, someone who could have easily ignored the situation but chose not to. Margaret's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of gratitude. "I don't know what to say. Thank you, both of you," she said, glancing at the younger Barron and then the older one standing beside him. Older Barron, taller and more composed, gave her a kind nod. "No thanks are necessary. My son did the right thing. That's what matters." But before they could leave, the younger Barron turned back toward Ryan, who was now visibly sweating behind the counter. The boy's voice was calm but carried a weight that silenced the entire cafe. "Do you realize how wrong you were today?" he asked. Ryan stammered, struggling to find the words. I I didn't know." "You didn't know she mattered?" The boy interrupted, his tone sharp now. "You didn't know she was a human being who deserved respect, regardless of her situation?" Ryan opened his mouth to respond but quickly closed it again, realizing there was no defense for his actions. His head dropped in shame. Margaret, ever the forgiving soul, spoke up. "It's all right. We all make mistakes." But the younger Barron shook his head. "Mistakes are one thing. A lack of kindness is another. You had a chance to help someone, and you chose to humiliate her instead. Don't ever let that happen again." The cafe remained silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Ryan finally managed to mumble, "I'm sorry. I'll do better." The older Barron stepped forward then, his voice carrying a quiet authority. "That's good to hear, but remember, apologies mean nothing without action. Change the way you see people. Every person who walks through those doors deserves respect, no matter what they look like or how much money they have." With that, the father and son turned back toward Margaret. Younger Barron pulled out another bill from his pocket and handed it to her. "This isn't charity," he said softly. It's a reminder that you're not invisible. You matter. Margaret took the money with trembling hands, her gratitude overwhelming her. Thank you, she whispered again. As the two barons left the cafe, the room remained silent, the weight of what had just happened sinking into everyone present. Customers who had looked away when Margaret was being humiliated now felt the sting of their own inaction. Ryan especially stood frozen, his mind racing with regret. But the story didn't end there. The next day, a young journalist who had been sitting in the cafe wrote about the incident, detailing every moment, the waiter's cruelty, the boy's courage, and the unexpected appearance of Barron Trump. The article quickly went viral, sparking a conversation about kindness, privilege, and the way society treats its most vulnerable members. Ryan, after reading the article, decided to make a change. He began volunteering at a local shelter, determined to make amends for the way he had treated Margaret. Margaret, on the other hand, used the money Barron had given her to find a small place to stay for a few nights. She eventually reconnected with an old friend who helped her get back on her feet. And as for Barron Trump, the younger one, he continued to use his position and influence to quietly help those in need. To him, it wasn't about recognition or fame. It was about doing the right thing, no matter who was watching. Every person has the power to make a difference, regardless of their status or circumstances. Kindness is not about grand gestures, but about seeing and valuing the humanity in others. In a world that often turns a blind eye, even the smallest act of compassion can spark a ripple effect, inspiring others to change and reminding those in need that they are not invisible.